What if I told you that 7 philosophical concepts, most of them over 500 years old, are directly responsible for building the world's fourth largest economy? Not metaphorically, not as vague inspiration. I mean measurably, with data, with case studies, with outcomes you can trace in corporate balance sheets and national GDP figures. Japan's $5 trillion economy wasn't built on natural resources. The country has almost none. It wasn't built on sheer population. China and India have 10 times as many people. It was built on a set of ideas about how to think, how to endure, how to improve, and how to find beauty in imperfection. And the strangest part? Most of these ideas were never meant to be business strategies at all. Image. In this video, we're going to trace how 7 ancient Japanese mind principles created concrete, measurable outcomes in the modern world. We're talking about a philosophy that gave Toyota a 30% efficiency advantage over every competitor on the planet. A concept of purpose that adds 7 years to your life expectancy, according to longitudinal research spanning 5 decades. A Zen practice that shaped every single Apple product you've ever held in your hands. A mental state that neuroscience now confirms makes athletes perform up to 5 times faster. A mindset that helped Japan recover from losing $2.5 trillion in 30 months. An endurance philosophy that rebuilt 95% of 570 kilometers of destroyed roads after the most expensive disaster in human history. And an 800-year-old aesthetic that the American Psychological Association now says might be the antidote to the modern burnout epidemic. Image. These aren't self-help platitudes. Every single claim in this video is backed by peer-reviewed research, government data, or corporate performance records. And by the end, I think you'll understand something that most people miss about Japan. That the real engine of this economy was never technology or manufacturing prowess. It was a way of thinking. Let's start with the one you've probably heard of, but almost certainly underestimate. Image. Kaizen. The word literally translates to change for better, and it sounds deceptively simple. Make small improvements every single day. But here's why it changed the world. In the early 1950s, an American statistician named W. Edwards Deming arrived in post-war Japan. The country was in ruins. Its manufacturing reputation was synonymous with cheap, low-quality goods. Deming brought statistical quality control methods, but the Japanese didn't just adopt his techniques. They fused them with something deeper, a cultural predisposition toward incremental refinement that had existed in Japanese craftsmanship for centuries. The result was Kaizen, a formalized philosophy where every single worker, from the factory floor to the executive suite, is empowered and expected to identify improvements in their daily work. Image. Toyota turned Kaizen into the Toyota production system, arguably the most influential manufacturing methodology in history. Here's what makes TPS revolutionary. Any worker on the assembly line can stop the entire production line if they spot a defect. This concept, called jidoka, or automation, was considered insane by Western manufacturing standards in the 1960s. You're going to let a line worker shut down $1 million production line? Yes, because catching a defect at the source costs a fraction of catching it at the end. The results speak in hard numbers. Companies implementing TPS methods report average efficiency gains of 30%. Toyota forklifts were ranked number 1 in quality for 11 consecutive years in the Peerless research study. Since 1956, Toyota has produced nearly 5 million industrial engines and 15 million engines total, all under a system where continuous micro-improvement is baked into every single process. Image. And it didn't stay in Japan. Today, virtually every Fortune 500 manufacturer has adopted some version of Kaizen or lean production. Amazon's fulfillment centers run on Kaizen principles. Boeing's aircraft assembly uses TPS-derived methods. Hospitals across the United States have implemented Kaizen to reduce patient wait times and medical errors. A philosophy born from the ashes of post-war Japan became the global standard for operational excellence. But Kaizen only tells you how to improve. The next principle tells you why to improve, and it might be the most powerful of them all. Chart. Ikigai. Your reason for being. In Okinawa, a subtropical island chain at the southern tip of Japan, there is no word for retirement. Think about that. The very concept doesn't exist in the language. Instead, Okinawans talk about their Ikigai. The thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And the data on what this does to human health is staggering. The Okinawa Centenarian Study, established in 1975, is the longest continuously running centenarian study in the world, with over 3,000 participants. Its findings: 68 out of every 100,000 Okinawans become centenarians. They are 80% less likely to develop heart disease and 25% less likely to develop breast or prostate cancer compared to Americans. Image. Dan Buettner's Blue Zones research found that having a strong sense of purpose, an Ikigai, adds 7 years of extra life expectancy. Not 7 months, 7 years. And perhaps the most remarkable data point comes from the Okinawan Moai tradition, social groups of 5 friends who commit to each other for life. One documented Moai has been together for 97 years, with an average age of 102. Japan's centenarian population hit a record 86,510 in recent years, up from just 153 when records began in 1963. Chart. Now, a word of intellectual honesty. Saul Newman's 2019 study found that roughly 230,000 Japanese citizens registered as being over 100 years old had actually died years earlier, a clerical problem that inflated longevity statistics. The Blue Zone data isn't perfect. But even with these corrections, Okinawa's centenarian rates remain among the highest in the world, and the correlation between purpose and longevity has been replicated across dozens of independent studies. The Ikigai concept went global when Hector Garcia and Francis Morales published their book in 2016. It sold over 5 million copies and was translated into 57 languages, making it the most translated book originally written in Spanish. Clearly, the idea of purpose as a life strategy resonated far beyond Japan. But what happens when purpose meets its opposite, when you approach everything as if you know nothing? Image. Shoshin. Beginner's Mind. In 1970, a Soto Zen priest named Shunryu Suzuki published a slim book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. One line from it became one of the most quoted sentences in Silicon Valley history. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. Shoshin is the practice of approaching every situation, no matter how familiar, with the openness and curiosity of someone encountering it for the first time. It sounds like a nice idea, but in the hands of one particular person, it became the design philosophy behind the most valuable company on earth. Image. Steve Jobs met Kobun Chino Otogawa, a Soto Zen monk from Niigata, Japan, at the Los Altos Zen Center in the early 1970s. What began as casual visits became weekly sessions, sometimes daily. Kobun wasn't teaching Jobs about business or technology. He was teaching him about Ma, the Japanese concept of negative space, through kinhin, or walking meditation. The profound importance of what isn't there. Jobs almost left Apple entirely to become a monk at Eiheiji, one of the 2 head temples of Soto Zen Buddhism, in Fukui Prefecture. It was Kobun who advised him to stay, telling Jobs he could practice Zen through his work. Kobun became the official spiritual advisor at Next, and he officiated Jobs' wedding in 1991. Image. The fingerprints of Shoshin and Zen aesthetics are all over Apple. The company's first marketing brochure in 1977 declared, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." The iPod was designed so that every function was reachable within 3 clicks. Apple Store interiors were designed like Zen gardens, open space, clean lines, natural materials. Jobs famously admired the Japanese bento box, where every element is precisely placed with nothing wasted, and applied that concept to Apple's packaging. There's also the deeper martial arts framework of Shu-Ha-Ri, obey, break, transcend, which maps precisely onto how Apple approaches product categories. First, master the existing form. Then break its conventions. Then transcend the category entirely, the way the iPhone transcended the phone. Without a Zen monk from Niigata, the most valuable company in history might look completely different. But Shoshin is about how you perceive. The next principle is about how you perform, by thinking about absolutely nothing. Image. Mushin. The mind of no mind. In Japanese martial arts, Mushin describes a state where the practitioner's conscious mind steps aside entirely, allowing action to flow without deliberation, without hesitation, without the interference of the analytical brain. Neuroscience has a name for this now: transient hypofrontality. During peak performance states, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for self-monitoring, doubt, and critical analysis, literally deactivates. Your brain releases a cocktail of dopamine, norepinephrine, and endorphins. Time perception shifts. Self-consciousness vanishes. You enter what Western psychology calls flow. Image. The performance data on flow states is remarkable. Research shows that athletes primed for flow improve up to 5 times faster than those who aren't. The flow cycle, struggle, release, flow, recovery, maps almost exactly onto traditional Zen meditation practices that have existed in Japan for centuries. PGA number 1 ranked golfer Jason Day uses a focus band neurofeedback headset specifically to achieve what he calls the Mushin state during competition. And corporations have taken notice. Google launched its Search Inside Yourself program in 2007, a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence course directly inspired by Buddhist meditation practices. It became so successful that it spun off into an independent nonprofit, the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. Chart. But perhaps the most compelling corporate case study comes from SAP, the German enterprise software giant. Their global mindfulness program, rooted in the same principles as Mushin, produced measurable results: a 13.8% increase in focus, 12.2% increase in creativity, 9.2% increase in employee wellness, and a 7.6% decrease in stress. Insurance company Aetna reported a 28% reduction in stress levels and a 20% improvement in sleep quality from their mindfulness programs, with potential savings of up to $22,000 per employee from reduced burnout alone. Ancient Japanese warriors figured out how to silence the critical mind during combat. Modern neuroscience proved them right. And now, Fortune 500 companies are paying millions to teach their employees the same skill. But what about when things don't flow, when everything breaks? That's where the next principle comes in, and it might be the most beautiful of them all. Image. Kintsugi, the art of golden repair. In the 15th century, during the Muromachi period, Japanese craftsmen developed a technique for repairing broken pottery by filling the cracks with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. Instead of hiding the damage, Kintsugi celebrates it. The fracture lines become the most beautiful part of the object. The philosophy behind it is profound. Breakage is not something to conceal or be ashamed of. It's part of the history of an object, and that history makes it more valuable, not less. Now let me show you what Kintsugi looks like at the scale of a national economy. Image. On January 4, 1990, the Nikkei stock index stood at 38,921. By December 5 of the same year, it had plummeted to 21,902. A 43% collapse in a single year. Land values would eventually drop 70% by 2001. $2.5 trillion in asset value vanished in just 30 months. In 1989, 32 of the world's top 50 companies by market capitalization were Japanese. By 2018, only Toyota remained on that list. Japan's economic bubble didn't just burst. It shattered. Chart. But here's where the Kintsugi mindset reveals itself. Japan didn't try to pretend the bubble never happened. It didn't chase quick fixes or abandon its fundamental industrial strengths. Instead, Japanese companies did something remarkable: they survived. They endured. They adapted slowly, methodically, across decades. And on February 22, 2024, the Nikkei reached 39,098.68, finally surpassing its 1989 peak after 35 years. The cracks were filled with gold. Image. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this philosophy is the Chinese, Japan's century-old companies. As of September 2024, there are 45,248 Japanese companies that are over 100 years old. 3,146 companies, 56%, of the world's businesses operating continuously for over 200 years are Japanese. 19 companies claim more than 1,000 years of continuous operation. Image. The oldest of them all is Kongo Gumi, a construction company founded in 578 AD, making it the oldest continuously operating company in the world. How do they do it? 89% of these century-old companies employ fewer than 300 people. They follow cocoon, family principles that emphasize continuity over growth, avoiding debt, maintaining cash reserves, and passing wisdom across generations. They don't try to be the biggest. They try to be the most enduring. In a world obsessed with disruption and hockey stick growth curves, Japan's oldest companies embody a radically different definition of success. The fractures don't destroy you. They become your defining feature. But what happens when the breaking isn't economic? When it's catastrophic, physical, and kills 20,000 people? Chart. Gaman. Enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. At 2:46 p.m. on March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the Pacific coast of northeastern Japan, the largest ever recorded in the country's history and the fourth largest in the world since modern record-keeping began. Tsunami waves reaching 40.5 meters crashed into the coast at Miyako, traveling at 700 kilometers per hour. Nearly 20,000 people died. 500,000 were evacuated. 138,000 buildings were completely destroyed. The economic losses reached $360 billion, making it the most expensive natural disaster in human history. Image. What stunned the world wasn't just the scale of the disaster. It was the response. International journalists arriving in the disaster zone reported something they had never seen before. Despite the catastrophe, there was no widespread looting, no social breakdown, no panic-driven violence. People formed orderly lines for water and food. Strangers helped strangers. Communities organized themselves before official aid arrived. The word that kept appearing in media coverage, both Japanese and international, was gaman, a concept deeply embedded in Japanese culture that means enduring hardship with quiet dignity and without complaint. 163 countries and regions offered assistance. 520 billion yen in donations poured in. 930,000 people received direct assistance. Image. And then Japan rebuilt. By 2021, 95% of 570 kilometers of destroyed roads had been reconstructed. The Japanese government implemented a 2.1% solidarity income tax on all citizens from 2013 through 2037, 25 years of shared sacrifice to fund reconstruction. The word kizuna, bonds of friendship, became the guiding principle of the recovery, selected as Japan's kanji of the year in 2011. Gaman isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending pain doesn't exist. It's about choosing to endure with purpose. The GDP impact of the earthquake was a decline of 0.47 percentage points, devastating, but far less than economists initially feared, precisely because the culture of gaman and collective action enabled Japan to recover faster than any comparable disaster in modern history. But there's one more principle left. And it might be the most relevant one for our era of burnout, anxiety, and impossible standards. Chart. Wabi-Sabi. The beauty of imperfection. This 800-year-old aesthetic, born from the Japanese tea ceremony tradition, holds that true beauty lies in things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. Wabi refers to inner richness found in simplicity. Sabi refers to the beauty that comes with age and the passage of time. A hand-thrown tea bowl with an irregular glaze. A weathered wooden beam. A garden that changes with every season. Wabi-Sabi finds more beauty in these things than in anything polished and flawless. Now here's why this matters for modern business and mental health. Image. An APA meta-analysis has linked perfectionism to anxiety, depression, and burnout. The pursuit of flawlessness doesn't produce better outcomes. It produces paralysis, procrastination, and eventual collapse. There's a principle in engineering and business that the last 5% of perfection costs 50% of total energy. The law of diminishing returns applied to human performance. Wabi-Sabi offers a radical alternative. What if done and imperfect is more valuable than perfect but never finished? Remember SAP's mindfulness data? Their 12.2% increase in creativity came not from pushing harder, but from embracing a mindset closer to Wabi-Sabi. Accepting imperfection and focusing on progress rather than perfection. Japanese youth are now reinterpreting Wabi-Sabi as a counter to social media pressure and workplace stress. The global slow living movement draws heavily from the same philosophy. Image. So here's the thread that connects all 7 principles. Kaizen says improve every day, but don't demand perfection, just make it better than yesterday. Ikigai says find your purpose, because without it, all the improvement in the world is aimless. Shoshin says approach that purpose with a beginner's mind, because expertise can become a prison. Mushin says when it's time to perform, let go of conscious thought and trust your preparation. Kintsugi says when you break, and you will, let the scars become your gold. Gaman says endure the worst with dignity, because recovery is always possible. And Wabi-Sabi says the goal was never perfection in the first place. It was finding beauty in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete. Japan built a $5 trillion economy not despite these principles, but because of them. They aren't relics of the past. They're operating instructions for the future. Image. If this changed the way you think about Japanese culture and business strategy, subscribe to the Japan Playbook and hit the bell. We publish deep dives into Japan's most fascinating strategies every single week. Which of these 7 principles resonated with you the most? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see how Japan is applying these same principles to its $65 billion semiconductor comeback, that video is right here.